Why do people really fall in love with you? Have you ever wondered if the person who once swore they loved you ever really loved you at all? Or were they just falling in love with a reflection, a part of themselves they saw in you? It's a question most of us are too afraid to ask. Because if we dare to answer it honestly, it might unravel everything we thought we knew about love. Think back to a time you were deeply in love, the kind of love that pulled you in like gravity. You shared dreams, secrets, maybe even a future. It felt cosmic, fated, as if the universe had conspired to bring you together. But then, something shifted. The passion that once burned uncontrollably turned cold. The person who once adored you started to look at you like a stranger. Or maybe you were the one who slowly disconnected, wondering how someone you once couldn't live without suddenly felt so unfamiliar. What happened? What if I told you they never really loved you? What if they loved an image, a symbol, a projection of something they longed for, but couldn't find within themselves? Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant minds in psychology, believed that most love isn't love at all. It's projection, a psychological illusion, a mirror. You become a screen, and they cast their hopes, traumas, fantasies, and desires onto you, often without even realizing it. So when they say, "I love you," what they may really mean is, "I love how I feel when I'm with you. I love the part of myself I see reflected in your eyes." Is that love, or is it something else entirely? In this video, we'll dive into the uncomfortable truth. People fall in love with you for only two reasons, and neither of them is about you. It's about them, and what you unknowingly awaken inside their unconscious mind. Are you ready to look into that mirror? That magnetic love that vanishes without warning. It always starts the same way, doesn't it? You meet someone, and from the very first moment, something clicks. It's not just attraction, it's a pull, almost like destiny. You find yourself saying things like, "It's like we've known each other forever," for this person to appear in your life. You stay up talking for hours. You discover shared dreams, uncanny synchronicities, and soul-deep laughter. You feel seen, really seen, in a way you didn't know you needed. Suddenly, the world feels brighter, more alive. Every song reminds you of them. Every quiet moment is filled with their presence. You call it fate, soulmates, twin flames even. But then, something shifts. Maybe it starts with subtle distance. Their replies take longer. The tone of their voice dulls. The magnetic energy that once lit up the room now feels dim. The deep conversations turn shallow, then fade into silence. Or maybe the collapse isn't subtle at all. Maybe it's a fight, the kind that shakes the very ground you built together. Or a betrayal. Or a slow, painful realization that they were never really who you thought they were. Or worse, you're not who they thought you were either. The love that once felt eternal suddenly becomes a memory, confusing, painful, and impossible to forget. You ask yourself, what happened? How can something that felt so real, so intense, so meant to be, fall apart so quickly? Were we wrong about each other? Or were we never really in love at all? Carl Jung believed that what we often call falling in love is not about discovering someone else. It's about uncovering something buried deep within ourselves. What we feel in those moments of overwhelming connection isn't necessarily love, but recognition. A resonance with an image that already exists in our unconscious mind. And when someone matches that image, even just for a moment, we feel drawn to them like a moth to a flame. But here's the catch. That image isn't about them. It's about us. We don't fall in love with the person in front of us. We fall in love with the part of ourselves they awaken. A forgotten dream, a lost emotion, a repressed desire. That's why it feels like magic, because it is, a magic trick of the mind, the projection. And that's also why it crumbles so easily, because no human being can sustain the weight of being someone else's fantasy forever. Eventually, reality knocks. The mask slips, the projection fades, and what's left is two people who were never really in love with each other, only with the idea of who they thought the other person was. If you've ever felt heartbroken, not because someone changed, but because they revealed who they always were, then you know exactly what this means. And maybe, just maybe, you've done it too. Fallen in love with someone who made you feel alive, who awakened a forgotten part of you, who reflected back a dream you'd buried long ago. But once the mirror cracked, you couldn't unsee the truth. That it wasn't about them. It was never about them. It was about you. Trying to remember something you'd forgotten about yourself. So the question isn't, why did they stop loving me? The real question is, why did they love me in the first place? What did I represent to them? What part of themselves were they trying to find through me? And even deeper, who have I fallen for not because of who they are, but because of what I needed to see in myself? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are the only ones that can lead us to real answers. Because once we see through the illusion, we begin to understand. Love, as beautiful as it is rarely what we think it is. And before we can experience love that lasts, we must first understand the unconscious games that masquerade as love in the beginning. Ready to go deeper? In the next part, we'll explore the first reason why people fall in love with you, and why it has far more to do with their inner emptiness than your actual self. Reason number 1. You represent what they lack. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But the same is true for what attracts us. What we love, sometimes even obsess over, often says more about what's missing in us than what's present in them. This is the first reason people fall in love with you. You represent something they have lost, denied, or never fully developed within themselves. It's not necessarily your personality, your looks, or your charm. It's what you symbolize, what you awaken. In Jungian psychology, this dynamic is called projection, one of the most powerful and invisible forces of the human psyche. Projection occurs when we unconsciously displace parts of ourselves, our desires, wounds, fears, or potentials, onto another person. Instead of seeing them as they truly are, we see them through a psychological lens colored by our unmet needs. And love? Love is fertile ground for projection. Imagine this: a person who has spent their whole life being rational, controlled, and composed. Someone who learned early on that emotions were dangerous, unpredictable, maybe even shameful. They became the thinker, the responsible one, the problem solver, the one who never cries. Then one day, they meet you. You're expressive, open, emotionally alive. You cry during movies, speak with your hands, feel deeply, and laugh loudly. They are captivated. To them, you are not just attractive, you are liberating. You embody the freedom they've denied themselves for years, the emotional richness they've long suppressed in order to survive, succeed, or stay safe. But here's the twist: they don't consciously realize that. What they feel is love, intense, irrational, all-consuming love. They don't know that what they're really falling for is a piece of themselves, buried, forgotten, and now suddenly awakened by your presence. You are not their other half. You are their inner exile, made visible. And in the beginning, that kind of love feels electric. It feels like wholeness, but it's built on a psychological illusion. Because the truth is, they aren't loving you. They're loving the version of themselves they see reflected in you. Now here's where it gets dangerous. If they don't become aware of the projection, the admiration quickly turns into dependency. You become their emotional oxygen, the living bridge to a part of themselves they haven't yet claimed. And so they cling, they idolize, they become afraid to lose you, not because of who you are, but because of what you mean to them. Suddenly, it's not love, it's survival, and that's a heavy burden to carry. Because the moment your humanity shows up, your flaws, your complexity, your contradictions, they don't know what to do with you. You start to fall short of the fantasy. You say something they didn't expect. You act in a way that breaks their projection. And instead of adjusting their understanding, they feel betrayed. Not by what you did, but by the shattering of the image they created. This is how love built on projection collapses, not with explosions, but with quiet confusion and growing disappointment. They begin to withdraw, or worse, they try to mold you back into the version they fell for, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of losing what you represented. But you can't live as someone's fantasy forever, and you shouldn't. This is why awareness is everything. Because projection in itself isn't the enemy. It's unconscious projection that wreaks havoc. When we don't realize we're projecting, we mistake symbols for reality. We chase lovers not for who they are, but for who we secretly want to become. Jung believed that these moments, when we fall in love with someone because they awaken what we lack, aren't failures. They're invitations, mirrors. They show us what we need to integrate, what we've been running from, and what we're capable of becoming if we stop outsourcing our soul to someone else. So the next time someone seems drawn to you, deeply, inexplicably, take a step back. Ask, what do I represent to them? What part of themselves are they seeing in me? And when you fall for someone intensely, don't just ask who they are. Ask, who am I trying to become through them? This is the path to conscious love. Love that's not based on holes, but on wholeness. Not on rescue, but reflection. Because the truth is, you were never supposed to complete anyone. And no one is meant to complete you. That's your job. And the moment you understand that, is the moment love becomes real. Reason number 2. You awaken their inner archetype. There's a second, and even more mysterious, reason why people fall in love with you. It's not because you complete them. It's not because you represent something they lack. It's because you awaken something ancient inside them. Something buried so deep in the unconscious that they don't even know it's there. Carl Jung called this inner force the anima and animus, the unconscious image of the opposite sex that every person carries within them. The anima is the feminine image within the male psyche. The animus is the masculine image within the female psyche. These aren't preferences or ideals. They are archetypes, psychological blueprints shaped by our earliest experiences with caregivers, by cultural symbols, by myth, and by the collective unconscious we all share. From childhood, we internalize impressions of masculinity and femininity, how love feels, what a man or woman should be, what tenderness looks like, what strength looks like, what intimacy means. These impressions don't stay at the surface. They sink deep, forming emotional templates within us, and eventually they take on a life of their own. We carry these archetypes silently, until one day we meet someone who matches the inner image perfectly. Maybe not in appearance, maybe not even in personality, but in essence, their energy, their presence, their voice, the way they look at you, or laugh, or move through the world. Something about them activates that deeply rooted inner figure. Suddenly, it doesn't feel like meeting a stranger. It feels like coming home. There's an overwhelming sense of familiarity, even if you've only just met. You feel like you've known them forever, that they were made for you, or that you've been searching for them your entire life. But Jung would warn you, this isn't love. This is projection on an archetypal level. This is your psyche seeing itself, not in the person, but in the symbol they've become to you. You don't fall in love with the person. You fall in love with the image within yourself that they awaken. And that's why the connection feels so irrational, so intense, so magnetic. Because it is. You're not just dealing with emotions. You are dealing with the unconscious. They have become the living embodiment of your inner anima or animus, and you worship them, not because of who they are, but because of who they represent. But here lies the danger. No real human being can live up to an archetype. They can echo it, reflect it, momentarily align with it, but they can't become it. Because archetypes aren't human. They are symbolic, eternal, and idealized. So what happens when the person begins to show their true self? When the cracks appear? When they don't always live up to the inner script you've written for them, the fantasy starts to break. That sense of divinity you once felt now feels confusing. The qualities you once adored now irritate you. And the relationship, once so magical, begins to feel unstable. sometimes even unbearable. Why? Because the archetype can no longer be sustained. And the person you loved wasn't really a person to begin with. They were a projection of your inner myth. Jung believed that this collapse isn't a failure. It's an initiation. When the archetype dissolves, we're left with the truth. Not about the other person, but about ourselves. What we projected, what we desired, what we idealized. This is where real love begins. Not in the fantasy, but in the fall from fantasy. When you stop seeing someone as a symbol and start seeing them as a flawed, complex, beautiful human being. And it's where real growth begins too. Because the anima and animus are not meant to control us. They are meant to guide us toward integration. They show us what we need to develop inside ourselves. Emotional depth, creativity, courage, independence, softness, strength. So when someone falls in love with you because you awaken their inner archetype, it's not about you. It's about what you represent on a soul level. And if you fall in love with someone for the same reason, pause. Ask yourself, am I loving this person? Or am I loving the story they've triggered in me? Because that story, if left unchecked, will demand perfection. It will punish authenticity. It will collapse under the weight of reality. But if you can see it, if you can recognize the archetype at play, you gain power. You step out of the illusion, and you give yourself and them a chance to be loved as you truly are. That's not just psychology, that's liberation. When the illusion breaks, so does the fantasy of love. It's only a matter of time. When love is built on projection, whether it's admiration of what someone lacks, or an unconscious archetype coming to life, the illusion will eventually collapse, not because anyone did anything wrong, but because no one can be a mirror forever. At some point, the cracks begin to show. The quirks that once seemed charming now feel irritating. The confidence you once adored becomes arrogance. The emotional sensitivity you once cherished starts to seem like weakness, or maybe they simply stop reflecting what you need them to. Why? Because the person has always been a real, living human being, not the fantasy your psyche projected onto them. They were never just your missing piece, never just your anima or animus, never just the emotional savior your inner child hoped would fix everything. They were themselves. But when we've been caught in the illusion, seeing the truth hurts. It feels like betrayal, not because they changed, but because the unconscious image we created in our minds is dying. And with it, so does the myth of perfect love. This is why passionate relationships often end in heartbreak, resentment, or even hatred. We say, they weren't who I thought they were. But the truth is, they never were. They were just who we needed them to be, for a time. Carl Jung captured this reality perfectly when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In other words, if you don't realize that your psyche is writing the script, you'll keep playing out the same old roles, wondering why love always ends the same way. You'll keep falling for people who mirror your inner wounds or forgotten dreams. You'll keep projecting archetypes onto strangers and calling it destiny. You'll keep chasing the high of idealized love, only to wake up in the rubble when the mask falls off. And worst of all, you'll blame yourself or them. You'll think you're broken. You'll wonder why love never lasts. But here's the truth. It's not love that's the problem. It's the illusion of love and your unconscious attachment to it. You were never supposed to become someone's missing piece. You were never meant to be their lost mother, their inner muse, their symbol of salvation. You don't need to carry the weight of someone else's unlived life on your shoulders, because the moment you do, the moment you try to maintain the fantasy, you disappear. You become a role, not a person. A projection, not a presence. An idea, not a reality. And eventually, that burden becomes unbearable. This is the breaking point, the moment of collapse, the point where you either retreat back into unconsciousness, start the cycle again with someone new, or you wake up. You realize, I don't need to be a symbol for anyone. I don't need to be loved for who I represent. I deserve to be loved for who I am, and so do they. This is where real love can begin, not as a perfect story, but as a conscious relationship. A meeting of two whole people who are aware of their projections, aware of their wounds, and willing to take off the masks. It's raw, it's imperfect, it's vulnerable, but it's real. And the beauty of that kind of love, the kind that doesn't demand you be anything other than yourself, is that it can actually last. Not because it's magical, but because it's honest. So if you've ever felt the pain of someone falling out of love with you, if you've ever felt the ache of being adored and then discarded, if you've ever wondered why intense love turns into distant silence, know this: it was never about you. It was about the part of them you unknowingly reflected. And once that part no longer served them, the mirror cracked. But now, you know better. You don't need to be a mirror. You don't need to be an image. You don't need to be anyone's illusion. You are not their story. You are your own. Love was never about you. It was always about what you awakened. Every person you've ever loved, truly loved, was a mirror. A reflection of something hidden within you. A forgotten longing, a buried fear, a dream you didn't know still lived inside you. Maybe they showed you what it feels like to be desired. Maybe they awakened your sense of purpose. Maybe they cracked your heart open just enough to let the light in. But whatever they were, whoever they weren't just a lover. They were a message from your unconscious. Jung called this the process of individuation, the path of becoming whole. And love, he believed, was one of the most powerful forces guiding us on that journey. Not because it always brings happiness, but because it reveals what is hidden. Love is a psychological invitation. It shows you the parts of yourself you've denied, the archetypes you've internalized, the projections you've placed on others without even realizing it. Every heartbreak, every obsession, every inexplicable attraction, it all has meaning. And that meaning is never really about the other person. It's about you. You weren't loved for your resume. You weren't loved for your smile or your sense of humor or your intelligence. At least not entirely. You were loved because you stirred something dormant in someone else's psyche. You were the key that unlocked a door they didn't even know existed. And they were that for you too. This is why some of the most intense loves of our lives don't last. Because they weren't meant to. They weren't designed for forever. They were designed for transformation. You didn't meet them to complete a love story. You met them to complete a part of yourself. But here's the truth Jung wanted us to see. Real love, conscious love, begins when the projections end. When you stop needing someone to be your savior, your fantasy, your missing half. When you can look at another person without illusion and still choose to love them, not for who they represent, but for who they are. That kind of love is rare. Not because it's impossible, but because most people never slow down long enough to see. They move from one projection to the next, mistaking chemistry for connection, intensity for intimacy, and they never ask the deeper question, am I really in love? Or am I just in search of myself through someone else? And maybe that's the question we all need to ask. Because the person who will love you most deeply, and the one you are most capable of loving, is the one who sees you without a mask. No fantasy, no projection. Just you. Your flaws, your fears, your fire, your softness. That kind of love doesn't happen by accident. It happens by awakening. So don't ask, who truly loves me? Ask instead, have I truly seen myself? Because once you do, once you see your own shadows and longings and inner figures for what they are, you stop trying to find completion through others. You stop chasing fantasy. You start building something real. And that's when love becomes what it was always meant to be. Not a distraction from the self, but a return to it. If this video awakened something in you, a memory, a truth, a realization, don't let it fade. Hit the like button to let us know this message reached you. Subscribe to the channel for more reflections that don't just inform, but transform. And most importantly, share in the comments. What part of today's journey resonated most deeply with you? What lesson, quote, or idea will you carry into your life? Your voice matters here, and someone out there may need to hear exactly what you have to say. Until next time, stay awake, stay curious, and keep returning to yourself.